Welcome everyone to the wonderful afternoon we're going to have together. Today we're here with Professor Elana Shohamy. She's a professor of language education at the School of Education at Tel Aviv University. Professor Shohamy researches topics of multilingualism within contexts of critical framework, language rights, and coexistence. Dr. Elana Shohamy's work challenges current monolingual assessments of multilingual users, proposing instead prototypes of multilingual assessments based on the full language repertoire. Her presentation today will critically engage us with issues of assessment of multilingual populations. Please welcome Dr. Elana Shohamy.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here. I think every time I come here, I have a different persona. I talk about different things. So I see some of the colleagues from Spanish, and I talked here in the fall about linguistic landscape. For those of you who don't know, you should know what linguistic is. Languages of the sign, which is another thing I do, and this is my hot topic now. Now, testing I've been doing for many years, and I also do work in language policy, which is another area, and I'm trying to connect all the three areas, in fact, in many different ways. So they're not detached from one another. So one of the things that I'm kind of working on now, and I didn't consume everything that we can do about it because there are not very many multilingual tests yet. So I'm mostly supporting the idea. Theoretically, I really believe that multilingual tests are really the only way to get the multilingual repertoire. So I was, and some other people here probably last week at the AAAL, the Applied Linguistic Conference in Toronto. And if there was one buzzword all around, in almost every talk, and including a talk we gave, me and Kate Menkin, you may have heard of Kate Menkin, was about translanguaging and multilingual teaching and multilingual testing. Because translanguaging was in almost every talk you went to. People talked about translanguaging. That was the buzzword. And there were so many papers about it. People are all feeling, even in the session on second language acquisition, people were saying second language acquisition, you know, the native speaker doesn't count anymore. So what are we talking about? What kind of language are we talking about when we have to admit and accept the other languages or the other varieties of languages? So it's clear to almost everybody that at least if people have know more than one language, we cannot just let it go. That language has to be counted. It has to be part of the linguistic repertoire. So I think there's large agreement about it, not by all. There are still people who would say, no, you know, one language at a time and only one language is important. But over the years, people have felt that this is discrimination in many ways. Because although languages, I know all these other languages, how come nobody looks at them? And it's very strange how so often we believe we don't know other languages. We were led to believe as immigrants that, let's say you came with Spanish or with Japanese or with Hebrew, and with time you just learned, you're so immersed in a new language that you even forgot that you have another language. And we always hope that schools will recognize it in some way. And one of the things that we're talking about in translanguaging is that let's count the language. If you listen to my English, I speak English pretty okay, but you see, you'll be surprised that every time I write an article or a book, I have to give it to a native speaker to go over it. Now, who is this native speaker? God, in a way, that what he says about my language is okay, and what I say is bad, and will remain bad forever. Moreover, I'm an editor. I was an editor of the journal Language Policy for 8 years. Now I'm the editor of the new journal, just to plug in, Linguistic Landscape, that's just coming out next month, the first issue. And every article we read, we keep many times, we say terrible things. You have to check your article with a native speaker. Otherwise we, the journal, won't accept it. But I also don't have a native speaker. What is it that we downgrade this variety so much? And if you listen to my English, it may not be native speaker, but it's comprehensible, probably. And if not, you'll say, can you say it again? And I will say it again and again. And if you have, if I say a word you don't know, you may use your computer to ask me, what did you really mean by that? And look at the dictionary. So there may be I'm missing words, but I don't want anybody to not recognize me, or not recognize my language is not recognizing me. And the question we always hear, which is so annoying to many of us who speak another language, and wherever, it doesn't have to be in America only, is the worst question that people are being asked, which is, where are you from? And the where are you from always is indicative, you are not part of us. And sometimes I even try to hide this foreignness. I don't do it anymore, but I used to. Or I see people who are, even my granddaughter who lives in New York, and she speaks Hebrew as well as English, and I will speak Hebrew to her sometimes in the street. She said, don't speak Hebrew to me in the street. I don't want my friends to know that you are my grandmother not speaking my language. So of course I don't let it stay like this. I have to convince her that it's okay, and all the things that's important, and to make sure that she's not embarrassed about her own language or about her grandmother just because of her language. So the question we are asking here is, what are the ways that we can give more credit or approval or acceptance? Now, there are many, many fields that are working on that. First of all, I think for maybe at least 10 years, many people do not accept the idea of the native speaker anymore. People say, yeah, we wish you were. Maybe teachers in school sometimes still think so. And maybe parents of immigrants will say, oh, please try to speak like everybody else, and let's practice it and listen a lot to TV and so on. But basically, we are doubting it. Why are we doubting it? Because we know that even if I try so hard to speak English like American, like a native American, whatever this is, right? There's so many varieties, we know that. I will never succeed. Because language accent, for example, never disappears after a certain age. So why are they trying to create me, to form me, to change me, to be like something that I'm not, and something that I can never be? Like some black cannot be white, and white cannot be black. So with accent, I think it's the same thing. Or even reading. I can read lots of English, and still there are areas that I'm not proficient in. So we, all of us, those foreigners, we develop all kinds of strategies that we can deal with that. I mean, we can go do PhDs, we can do so many other things. Moreover, what we are trying to say, and this is really the point of the whole talk, is that this is not a liability. This is a forte. This is an advantage. I have two languages. So if I hear something else, I can know. So I'm sure you know all this stuff, but I just try to put it in a very kind of plain discourse on what really is going on. I'm not the other. I'm one of you, or you may not be one of me, because you are so deficient. You have only one language. And it's kind of interesting for me, because in my own family, they spoke Yiddish for many years. And my grandmother, and my grandparents. And I grew up in this family. For many years, you'd ask me, I'd say, I don't know Yiddish. No, I never learned it. I don't know Yiddish. But if I heard Yiddish until I was a grown-up, there's no way that nothing entered my brain. Of course, there was some Yiddish here. So a few years ago, only a few years ago, I went to a conference about the loss of Yiddish, because for some of you who don't know, Yiddish was a language that Jews spoke in Eastern Europe, mostly. When they came to Israel, people in Israel said, no, Yiddish is not good for us. You have to speak this new language called Hebrew. So Yiddish, a Jewish language, was not good for the Jews. Kind of strange, no? So they said, so everybody, my parents, everybody had to learn Hebrew. Of course, my grandmother could not do it. She was 45 when she moved to Israel. How can she learn a new language that wasn't even in use? We're not talking about language like learning English in America. Hebrew was not even a spoken language. How can you learn this not spoken language from scratch when you're, 45 or something? So she never learned it. My grandfather did learn it, and I did show some pictures in this conference 2 weeks ago in Georgetown about the victims, the losers, the victims of language, which I call them. These people who were always outcasted. My father lived in New York. had English, came to Israel, no job. He could never find a job because he didn't know Hebrew. So, I mean, we were the victims of not knowing the language. So I think for me, so I went to this conference a few years ago, and the whole conference, 3 days, were in Yiddish. And I could understand everything. Not everything, maybe 80%. Now, wow, Yiddish from then on, from 2 years ago, is part of my linguistic repertoire. So I think what I discovered when I was, I don't want to tell you how old, that Yiddish is actually part of my repertoire, and I should not be ashamed of that. Because there are many times that, that you need Yiddish. And I know that language, but I never thought I knew because nobody gave me the permission to own that language. So I think we're doing a very bad mistake by demanding, even in language classes, that people should be high level or native speakers, because not that it's a bad thing, but I think some people should ask, what do I rather have? 5 languages and know them so-so, or level 1, level 3 on the CFR or whatever, or know one language really well. In this global world, I think it's a very simple answer. And I think about my grandchild, my grandchildren, I wanted to know many languages, not so well each one, because knowing Hebrew is important language, but only 6 million people in the world speak the language. So it's kind of doesn't have much of a market. So you go out of this little Israel, and where are you? So you have, so I think, so that's, I'm not saying what is better, but I think in general, in a multilingual world, we better know multilingual languages, a number of languages. But think of testing. So testing actually hasn't really dealt with that, because testing said always one language, one nation. And I have this tool called tests, and I will force you into the new language, and I will demand that you will know it very, very high. And so far, the point I want to say is that we accepted the idea of languages, that people need a number of languages, not all of us, but most of us, and we accepted the idea, especially the work of Ophelia Garcia, about translanguaging and leeway. So this is kind of becoming more accepted. And I will say, like, as I said again, last week in the conference at AAA, it was a very dominant topic. People don't know exactly what translanguaging is. So we try still to figure out what it is. And in the SLA, Second Language Acquisition session in AAA, people say that they were all confused. Because for SLA people, the native speaker was always the right model. What do you do now? So I think my conclusion from the AAA conference in Toronto was that the applied linguistic field, this field that many of us deal with, is in a point of crisis. We don't know what to do with that. And I was just in Emory, I mentioned you 2 days ago, and there was a meeting to talk about something else, about linguistic landscape. And some of them came back from applied linguistics, the AAA, and they were talking about translanguaging. The language teachers of French, of German and other subjects didn't know what it meant, translanguaging. And they said, what do you do with that? How do you really, what does it mean for us? We've been teachers of French. For years we knew what French is. And now you're telling us what we are teaching is overdoing it. You're demanding something which is not realistic. What should I do with that? So my feeling is that we really are in a point of crisis, and even language testing is in a point of crisis. But theoretically, I am so sure that without assessing, learning how to assess multilingualism or translanguaging or the full repertoire, we will not be able to proceed. So you see some efforts in various, ETS now is working on a number of tests which are translanguage in Spanish, English. A number of other people, and I'll give you some examples in a minute, people are working on that, but I cannot say that we know where we are really at this point in time. So what I try to do is to convince you even further, to try to convince you that this is what we are talking about. So what I want to say is, basically what I do is something called like critical testing. I don't know if you know what critical testing is, so I thought because it's mentioned in the title, so I'll just say what critical testing, and I started working on this like 15 years ago. And critical testing basically says, let's ask questions about tests. And I know that David Berliner was here last night, so some of you have heard him. David Berliner for years now has been doubting all the tests. He's been doubting the No Child Left Behind. He's been doubting now the test for teachers. And I've met him a number of times, and he is one of the few, I think, that say, wait a minute, we don't have to accept those tests. So we're talking about the No Child Left Behind, we're talking about the, how do you call the one that they're using now here? What?
Race to the top.
Yeah, what is it? The Common Core, sorry, I forgot. The Common Core, which is, and I've talked about it many times, and really very, because Common Core doesn't take into account your home language. Never, it's only in this one language. So basically what we do, we raise questions about tests. We challenge the power of tests. And the book I wrote in 2001 is called The Power of Tests. We challenge the tests. And people in my profession, in language testing, hated me, maybe may still hate me for that. How can you doubt language tests? We are doing language tests. How can you be critical of something that we are doing? So for many years they refused to accept my view about language tests that I was critical about. I said it's too powerful, it affects the curriculum, it doesn't really, it's not really real. Some people can never do well on tests and it dictates the curriculum and everything. And in 2010, at least, they gave me a lifetime award on being critical. So the conclusion is also, stick to something that you believe it's right, and whatever the other guys, usually men, say, don't listen. Okay, so the third thing is we examine the impact. What do tests do? If they drive people crazy and you don't leave home because you have to prepare for the test and it's not even realistic, there's a problem. So the whole issue of impact and cost and ethicality, inequality and justice, tests don't serve these purposes. So we try to change it and we try to be activist about it and advocate. We don't want the No Child Left Behind. Look, it got wrapped, the No Child Left Behind. Where is it? Is it still being used? Huh?
Yeah.
It's still big type instead of the Common Core?
It's in conjunction.
I think
A Common Core is an option.
Are still, I mean, the policies from NCLB are still intact, but the Common Core is like a new introduction.
I see, just to reinforce it.
Reauthorized though. So there's already talk about reauthorization of No Child Left Behind.
Reauthorization, the Bush, the 2001 thing. Okay, I see. So reauthorization, but it's kind of interesting that it was, by 2014, everybody was supposed to be No Child Left Behind, right? Now what is it, 2015 already? Anyway. So I think one of the reasons that No Child Left Behind got cut in so many places is because parents objected, state objected. So I think when you see some injustice about it, the only thing to do is to fight against it. And I know parents were very active in fighting against it. And we have lots of examples where this kind of advocacy works. And one of my points has always been in critical testing is that we testers, we work on tests. We are responsible not to develop things which are harmful. So if you find that a test has bad consequences on people, you know, in Japan, people sometimes commit suicide after results of tests. I mean, it's like high stake. In my book, I explain all these things. But basically, we have responsibility to develop. It's kind of somebody who develops a car and there are accidents. Doesn't he have to share the responsibility for the quality of the car? So I think this is what we're talking about. Okay. Now, let's go further to what are tests in general. So I think tests have two parts. Well, four parts, but the two most important. The what? What are we testing? So for years and years and years, we were testing, like, let's say, French, where the goal was the native speaker, French, in whatever, or English, or something like that. Or, okay, the how is, what are the techniques to develop? Like multiple choice would be one technique. Open-ended, computerized tests, these are techniques. So basically, we say two major parts, the what and the how. Then, in the past 3 years, since the papers by a person named Messick, if you heard his name in ETS, we started looking at the impact of tests. Do they have good, positive, or negative impact? And now we talk more about the stakeholders. We also, if we see some injustice, parents, teachers, scholars, language, we have to react. So here, for example, the what, and I want to mention bilingual. We say that language, people are bilingual. Are we testing that? No, so we have problems with the what. The what is also called the construct. People in language testers testing, no, the construct is what are we testing? Now, non-native is the construct now. If non-native is the ideal, it's okay, then it's all right. It should be part of the construct. Now, I don't know if you know what ELF is. I gave a paper last week at AAA, and we used the word ELF, so Kate might say, no, they don't know what ELF is. Do you know what ELF is? Some of you. ELF is English lingua franca. It's not surprisingly that many people in America don't know it, but in the world, English is everybody's language now, right? Around the world. Even if countries that don't like the USA, still English will be, you know, a very important language. But ELF is English lingua franca. There's no more expectation for language to be like the native speaker. So English lingua franca, you should know English of a foreign English, in a way, call it. Okay? And this is where you see, I was in Japan, it's all about ELF. I was in Athens, and they all are busy about how to test ELF. So if none, like if I think about Israel, nobody speaks a native language. I mean, nobody. Unless you spent a few years in America. This is why you hear our Prime Minister Netanyahu speaks English like this, because he was a high school in America, so then this is why. But other people won't. Right away you know the person from somewhere else. So we are all talking ELF. But the tests are not ELF. The tests are still the native speaker. So they are worried. ELF, it's a very, very big group around the world. People are pushing ELF. They have a journal ELF, and I don't know if you heard of Barbara Seidelhoff. And Jennifer Jenkins, of course. So these people work a lot on ELF, and they have conferences, and they have journals, and everything. And they're worried, and they say, we speak ELF, and we are proud of it. So I think, so like Barbara Seidelhoff, people would say, okay, she comes from Vienna, her ELF is like English in German, okay? So I speak my ELF, and it's okay. I want you to recognize it. So ELF is a huge movement around the world, and I'm sure you know what I mean, because we and many others speak ELF, and it's okay. We don't feel bad about it. And all right. So the stakeholders, so then how? I mentioned the impact, critical language, let's ask questions, and the stakeholder, those who make decisions to use given tests. Like we're talking about a lot about principals, teachers, parents, school boards, and so on, because they decide what tests should be used in a school, or the president of the USA who says, yes, the Common Core, or the head of the state, or whatever. Okay, so basically the idea comes theoretically from what we call expanding language. So language has a totally different meaning nowadays, I would say in the past decade or two. So we talk about language as there's no standard language, or with even two people who speak native, one from the south, I was in Atlanta, I told you, somebody from here, they speak very differently. Right. So major advances in language testing have been mostly in the how. Language testers, of which I am a part of this group, we talk a lot about statistics, about analysis of test data, about scoring, rating, the rating scales, the actual, the CFR, but people don't talk very much about the what. Little advance of the what. What are we really testing? So the kind of thing we talked about just till now, about the number of the different Englishes. What is English? So people don't talk about it. I was in the language testing research colloquium just before AAA. I don't remember one paper about the non-native variety of English. English is still viewed as this ideal thing. Okay, so language is viewed, in fact, language is viewed as dynamic, energetic. We look at language as a much more active thing now. Changes, one day you use this word, one day you use it, one day you use it and then you insert all kind of words in other languages. If you listen to the language at my daughter's house with her daughters, last I was thinking about it because we had a visitor and I wonder what the visitor thought. But for 5 hours and he was there, it was David, and it was Hebrew, English all mixed. And it was a natural language at home. You never dare to do it in school, not only because other people may not understand you, but it's not legitimate. If you put a word in Chinese, people say, well, you have no social skills. You don't think about the native speaker that he doesn't understand what you want to say. Okay, so fluid boundaries, we're talking about code switching, lots of code switching, as in my daughter's place. Clearly non-native varieties, translanguaging, negotiations, we talk and we negotiate and we bring in words. Even to somebody I said to yesterday, to this friend that was over, and I said, I wanted to explain something. And we had to bring words from Hebrew. We said, these words don't exist in English, even if you try. I want to tell you, in Hebrew, there is a better word for that. I'll tell you what word. I'm sure he went home knowing at least 10 new words yesterday. And it's like, English didn't work, you know, because we taught this Passover tomorrow night, and my daughter was preparing, you know, things. So we were talking a little bit about the holiday, and the little granddaughters were coming with some stories about it from previous years. We had to bring words in Hebrew. It didn't work in English. So this is like translanguaging, even with somebody who doesn't know a word in Hebrew. Okay, so a number of languages can live, and the person, besides Ophelia Garcia, I mentioned Li Wei. The two of them wrote a book, which is very big hit now. You may have seen it. It's a booklet, more or less, about translanguaging. It's called Translanguaging. I think you can even download it from the internet. It's called Translanguaging, Ophelia Garcia and Li Wei. So we're talking about, I don't want to go into multimodal, but multimodal is something that a number of us work, and I'm sure some of you know about multimodality. I can tell you that it wasn't mentioned even once in the language testing conference. But we know a lot in multimodality, especially those who work in literacy, because we talk about pictures, we talked about sounds, we talk about noise, we talk about graphs, we talk about so many things today. And our work, with the two people sitting in the back, our work in linguistic landscape to a large extent touches not just language, but pictures and colors and shapes and many other things. Not everything happens through words. Okay? So so language has really expanded. Music, clothes, food, smellscapes. Have you heard of smellscapes? There's a new book by Alistair Pennycook, if you heard the name, that just came out about metro linguistics. Metro, the language of cities. And what he talks a lot is about how you go to certain areas, especially markets, and there are smellscapes. You can identify the place to the smell. You know what I'm talking about? Yes. You come to your hometown, you get off the bus, and it's familiar in some level. And smell is not a good word, because smelly means bad. But basically, you come to this building, there is this unique smell. Maybe it's the carpets, maybe it's the New York air, something. So there is something, and it's not necessarily bad. It's really some characteristic feature of the place. So people are talking about smellscapes. Okay? So soundscapes and all these things. All right, I don't want to give you a whole talk on that, but I don't want to do it now. But English is a test. New Englishes are constantly being created in dynamic and personal ways, hybrids, fusion, and all these things. I can send you this PowerPoint, so if you want to look at that. Okay, and we create all kinds of words. Look at this word. What is if you look at the word down, the top one is Hebrew, the middle one is Arabic, the bottom one is English. Do you know what it means?
Street?
Name of a street of somebody. You won't know. That's English letters, but it's not English words. Yitzhak Lamporti, you know, whatever. I don't even know who it is, but it's like something, a word, this is English too. Okay, transliteration. Or something like that. Try to read this. It's not the translation even, it's the Rehov Lochamei Harova Betashach. So it says, now you won't know what it means. It means something like the street of the fighters of the squatter in 1948. It's like a long message for 4 words, right? And what you see here, I'm just throwing it in, what you see here, since the middle one was in Arabic, people who saw it didn't like Arabic, so they crossed it. And basically what they said over the Arabic, they said, no Arabs, no suicide attacks. So you see, whatever language you have, whether it's English, but especially Arabic, it doesn't leave you apathetic. Okay? All right. Yet all language tests measure competence, and we said it already. Okay? The fluidity of language doesn't exist, not in the test contract, not in the rating scales. Here you use the actual, but do you know what the CFR is? You don't. Some of you know. CFR called the Common European Framework of Reference. This is the scale of the world. It's like the new Bible, okay? And this is all, you probably heard about A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. In Europe, it's huge. In Korea, it's huge. In China, it's huge. Everything, people are defined by the level of their language. And there are 5 scales, 6 those different levels, and each one describes what it means. But no credit is being given to knowing other languages. It's only in one language, okay? Grades are in languages and everything. Nobody touches the full language repertoire, okay? So I showed you this. Oh, I'm going backwards, sorry. Okay. And the tests, basically driven exclusively by monolingual ideologies. Tests, school national tests are in L1. Global test is the PISA. You know what the PISA is, do you? Yeah. L1. Citizen tests around the world are only in L1, no credit to your home language. You have to know, if you go to Italy, you have to know Italian. No credit to anything else, you know, you come tabula rasa, as if you're an illiterate person. Okay, when 2 or more languages are assessed, these are done in total separation. Now in French, now in, okay. And no credit is being given to that. Let's say in speaking, mixed codes, you see L1 accent like mine, code switching and grammar, lexicon, you get penalized for something like that if you do these. If I don't have a good accent, I will never be like a top, well, I won't be a top 1, the advanced plus or whatever it's called, or C2, never. In writing, if I use wrong syntax for my own language, which is only natural for my elf, forget it, I'll get penalized. In listening, the same thing. In reading, I have to understand. Reading is also difficult because you don't have background sometimes. But you can say you have background from your own language. Forget it. And I'll show you some data in a minute. For whom is multilingual assessment needed? What I used to think that multilingual tests needed are only for immigrants. But not so. All second language, foreign language learning. You learn French, you can learn French for 10 years. You still are counting and using your L1. My mother just passed away a year ago. She was 97. She spoke Yiddish when she was a child, grew up in New York, moved to Israel. And then she knew 3 languages, Hebrew, Yiddish, English, all in a very high level. For years and years, every time she said, but I don't know how to say the word. I know how to say it in Yiddish, but I cannot say it in Hebrew. And for years, she was always using all the 3 languages she knew as her repertoire. And she needed them. Now, some people say, don't bring these other ones. But she decided, she built on them positively. This is what I'm trying to say. Okay, ELF, I already talked about ELF. ELF, obviously, it's a combination of languages. Test accommodations, I'm sure you know about it because it's big in America, you know, the accommodations for immigrants. So there is people understand that you cannot just jump into a country and know the language right away. If you go tomorrow to Sweden, you won't be able to function. It will take you how many years, do you think? To be like, kind of get high grades in academic texts. How many years does it take you? 7, you say 7 years. 7, yeah, you're not far. If you move to a new country tomorrow and you want to function academically, it doesn't matter, you move in age 6, age 9, age 12, how many years will it take you to perform well academically?
Well, I think it also depends on where you're moving. Like I lived in the UAE for 3 years, and I know so little Arabic because it's so different than English.
Okay.
It was so hard. Versus like going to Spain, where I learned Spanish pretty quickly.
Yeah. Okay. Right. It depends. Some languages are more difficult than others, especially according to the distance with your home language.
Right.
And Arabic has a far distance. Right. But how long would you estimate? If you went to school in 1st grade, when do you think you would be able to function reading text and so on? 7 to 10 years. This is really what we found, and I'll show you some data in a minute. About, if you're with high literacy scales, it will take you 7 to 10 years. If you come with low literacy scales, never. You'll never get it in the 1st generation. So what happens to people who jump into a new country? What do they do all those years when they're still in the process of learning the language? They don't get anything, they go behind. They fall behind. So accommodations is trying to help them, right? Let's give you some words in English, we'll teach you, give you bilingual education or whatever, okay? But accommodations say after a few years, forget it, no more accommodations. That's it. You get the stick, and then one day, throw the stick away. You don't need it anymore. And one of the things that we're saying is the stick is needed forever. You may not like it, but you know, we don't do, I'm not at fault that I was born in the wrong country, you know, that my parents immigrated or whatever. You know, it happens. It's not like somebody's not at fault when they get sick or something. What do you do? So with language, they told us, just study, study hard, and you'll get there. You'll get there, but you won't ever be like somebody born to the language. But think about it, you know more than one language. So there are give and takes, how do you call it? Okay, you see, I don't know how to say this in English. Okay, but until they get rid of the liability, still viewed as a liability, as the goal is to get rid of home languages, right? So that's to taste of accommodations. And this is the picture that I want you to remember. Basically, that's, now I go places, oh, she's the one with the picture, with the one eye, with the one eye. So the one eye is really, basically you come with one eye and the other, let's say this is English and this is my language, French, let's say. So you come, you know French a lot, and people are teaching in school to start getting blind in this language and develop this language, right? Another language. So basically you become monolingual in another language. And this language, you're still, it may be more appropriate because people live here in English. But if you were to move somewhere else, forget about that, language was never cultivated. So I think what we're trying to say is like we have to, in language testing, develop the two eyes to keep. You have this eye already. Why? Yeah, right, why get rid of it? Okay. So here, this is the one. I think it's a good metaphor. So the L1 is being viewed as liability, we already said that, intrusion, and so on. Okay, but the reality is we keep using it forever because we hear it at home, we hear it from the grandparents, it's around us, we hear it in the community because oftentimes immigrants live in different communities. Okay, all right. But what we see, the most important thing, which I'll show you in a minute, here, is this one. Okay, this is an important one. I'll come back to the other one. So this is very convincing, and I always carry this slide with me. Basically, it says that these are students came from Russia to Israel, and they had to pass after a year or so, like the No Child Left Behind. After 12 years, 12 months, you have to do the No Child Left Behind, right? And the Common Core also. So we gave them the test of math in Hebrew and in Russian. This is the blue. The top one. The pink one, a group of students who got the test in Hebrew only. So in other words, each question was written in two languages, Hebrew and Russian, Hebrew and Russian. So certain words, let's say you didn't know what the word mosquito is in Hebrew, at least you saw mosquito in Russian and you knew that word. And the other group, like every other immigrant, and no child left behind, you get it right away in a new language. Of course you don't know that. So here what happens. And it always, having the test in two languages, always helps you. In other words, this is proof, and it's not the only proof, that two languages, you rely on your two languages, especially in the first few years. I still have words I don't know, like I just told you before, cost, benefit, or whatever was the word I tried. But the fact, if I had it in Hebrew, I would know it, I can understand that the math text, the mathematic text, I'm not talking even about language per se, but most language that we use today is not just for conversation, it's for academic purposes, which is the most important asset for us, because this is how we succeed in society or whatever. So, and I think this is relatively very easy to do, and in fact in our government, the Ministry of Education, for a while they decided to do it. So we have lots of students from Russia, lots of students from Ethiopia, lots of students from, so for each one you can use it by computer, just do a translation of the test and give them the two forms in two languages. We haven't tried it with 3 languages and it's a relatively very limited kind of research, but I think we are going to do more. And every time you have the test in math in 2 languages, you get better. It makes sense. Okay? If you had words in Chinese now, in a test in whatever they give, it will be useful for you, right? Okay. So, now I want to come back to the question I asked you before, and that is, what time should I get to questions? So now it's 6 o'clock, 5 to 6? 6:10. 6:10. Okay, thanks. Okay, so basically what I want to show you here is, this is the question I asked you before that you answered, that you said 7 to 10 years, and this is the data we've achieved, and not only us, because basically what we see here is, look, these are the Israeli students born to Hebrew. This is a group of, the blue one are groups of Ethiopian students. These are groups of Russian students. Now what do we see? In its test in math, in what grade 9. In other words, those students have been in Israel 2 years, you see 2 years, 4 years, let's follow the Russians, the red one. 4 years are doing better, these are the Israelis, they're getting closer to the Israelis, even higher after 5 to 6 years. If they're higher after 7 to 8 years, it's not months, it's years, and finally 9 to 10 years, they even surpass the local Israeli students because they come from Russia, and in Russia they put a lot of emphasis on math. Let's look at the Ethiopians who come with low SES skills, not very good writing, not very good reading, poverty, and so on. Immigrants, and you see here, they go high, they get higher, they get, oh sorry, the blue. They get higher, they never, even this is, I'll tell you why this is even lower here, but basically they don't do better ever in first generation. And it stays like this, they will always be behind. Kind of you see the situation in the US with the Chinese immigrants oftentimes, they do better than people from other places, okay? Other immigrants, not all immigrants, we know these studies here, that not all immigrants from all countries do the same. And here the comparisons to the natives. Is this a fair comparison? I'm saying this is I did the study, it's a national study in Israel. I think it's a terrible study in that respect. Why did I even compare? This is what the government wanted. But it was clear that the immigrants will not know as well as the natives. I was shocked that it took them so long. Okay? That so many years it takes you when you do immigration to do well. But the good thing is that when I showed you the other one, the other score, that you saw that the two languages do help. Okay, so this is another one in math as well. You see the Ethiopians, the blue, it's even worse than the Hebrew. And here the Russians, the red, after 9 to 10 years, are managing to do math. I'm sorry, the one before was Hebrew. My mistake, sorry. So that was Hebrew, and here the math, and they did well after 11 to 12 years, because math is a very difficult language for immigrants. Because there's no repetition of words. You know, when you read history, we always thought that the history text would be more difficult for immigrants. In fact, not at all. Because history, you don't get it from here, you get it from the table, you get it from another source, you can open the internet, whatever. But with something like this, like math, sometimes one word, you don't know the word water, or faucet. In one of those questions, how long does it take to fill a pool? So you have those questions here. You don't know the word pool, forget it, you flunked the test, or water, or whatever. Okay, let me continue. All right, this I showed you this. I want to show you more small studies. You see, for example, here, years in Israel, even in English speakers. Now you see the scores in the reading comprehension test. It's a small n, but still. 10 to 15 years in Israel, still. Hebrew, the language of the test was Hebrew, 59.1. You give them Hebrew and English, 84.42. They're almost like the native Israelis. So two languages are better for what? For immigrants. And it repeats itself a lot. More, okay. Then there's these writings. You may have seen it in other presentations I've given over the years, but this is how people write. And I just saw Maria, Carmen, with you, I saw the example of the emergent bilingual French, had a dissertation on your table. And here, how does a person write a recipe of chocolate chip cookies? What does it say? What do you do? Take שופך in the קערה, take the water and שופכים in the קערה, take the chocolate and שופך in the קערה, again, take the sugar and the salt and שופך in the קערה too. Take the מערבל, the mixer, the מערבל, and take the מערבל and תערבל, I think תערבל, yeah, mix. And take the isa, take, you know, the isa, I don't know how to say it, what happens, what comes out of this dough. The dough, take the isa, and שופך in the, basket. I used to know. Okay, take the Isa. He decides to write Isa in Hebrew because he wasn't sure it would. And Korot in the cookies and the Isa and do put in the tanur. Tanur means just oven. Okay. So, and this is, in case you don't know, you see a picture, right? Okay, and here, you know, tavnit, is a pan, whatever, he gives the impression, you understand that, but he's able to write it. And I'm sure you do these kind of things and something good will come out. All right, so, what I want to say, this is something else I want to bring in. It's not directly language related, but I want you to consider it very much when we're talking about languages, what we have. So here's an example of we took two topics, not just translation, but here we took two topics. The topics were first language maintenance, and the second one was difficulties in immigration. People who never immigrated don't know what is difficulties in immigration, right? How would they know? They also don't know what it means to maintain home languages. So what happens is that we gave them, the Israelis got from those topics 62, 69, and unfamiliar topic. For them, they got 58. So the Israelis did well. They didn't do as well because they didn't know this topic. Even for the Israelis, it's difficult to write on something they don't know. Now with the former USSR students, the Russian students, they got 55, 53, 56. And they got higher scores that they did with the unfamiliar topic. Look, the unfamiliar topic, they got 37. When it's a familiar topic, 56, 55. So they got higher score than they did. And the Ethiopians, also a problem like that, with the unfamiliar topic, 38. But even difficulties in migration, they did better because it was familiar to them. Another thing is like something with, instead of words, we put verbal and visual. Words they didn't understand, but if we put like a verbal, look, 53, and the former Soviet Union, 47. When they put visual, just a picture, they were able to understand it more. Because the word they didn't know, but picture, vice versa. And the symbol, you know, mathematic symbols, you know, they knew much better, so that helped them as well. So what I'm trying to say here, there are ways to compensate for this lack of knowledge, such as pictures and other ways. Okay, I just wanted to say it's not just about language. Instead of language, you can put in familiar topics. There are lots of problems for those people. Okay, so there's another thing that I don't know if you know that the people in testing who are here, and I understand that there are a few here. So the DIF, the differential item functioning, we can see right away which items are most discriminating against immigrants. Like the one I just showed you. They don't know anything. The non-immigrants don't know about immigration. The immigrants don't. But let's say lots of questions about traditional Israeli Jewish culture. The immigrants may not know anything about it, and the Israelis know. So we were able to identify items on tests which discriminate, call it discrimination, and not to use those items. So that's also another way to help. Okay, there are more studies studied by Ray Dickens in Zanzibar. You know, those are students in Africa where they learn everything in English. Now, this is terrible. You walk into the classroom, they're supposed to learn in English. Some of them don't know English really well, but all the medium of instruction is English. And of course, they don't do well on tests, because the test they have to take a test that comes from Britain. No way. So, okay. So then another work by Shizel and more, and this is the work by Logan Terry. Is also very interesting, because what people are doing now is think aloud protocols. Like you take students who know Spanish and English, and you say, okay, now try to resolve this mathematic problems. How do you think they talk about it, the two of them? In Spanish. If I would sit here with somebody from Israel and we have to build a building, how would we talk about it? We would talk about it in Hebrew. Because English will be too difficult for us to talk about something like that. So the whole idea of thinking about how people make sense, and we see more and more people make sense through their L1. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Okay, mediation is a big thing. Even ETS, I think, is doing mediation now, which means let's talk about the content, but in our familiar language, which I just showed now. Okay, so basically this is what I'm saying. We have to put in all this knowledge. I'll give you some examples here. Okay, look at some of the examples. I'm not saying that it's exhaustive or anything. It's just writing in hybrids, like I just shown you, reading in L1, processing in L2, discussing a text in one language orally based on a text in another language, multilingual rubrics relating to different domains, mono, multi, and I can tell you more of each one. Group tests, where people are allowed to encourage even to use a number of languages. What I just showed now, number 7, cognitive work, mediation, talking about the test in L1, and using multiple qualitative assessment approaches to see how people can resolve problems, because oftentimes they will follow the right way, but they will get the wrong answer. Okay, so that happens too, this I showed you already. Okay, so trans-languages, challenges now. I'm not saying it's challenges. What do you mean by trans-languaging? I said it from the beginning. We have to be, it's only a new idea, a new concept, multilingual, but we know it exists, we know it's right, we still don't know what to do with that. So maybe next time I get here, we'll solve it. Okay, so here, trans-language is still a vague concept. Can testers respond to this new reality, as well as teachers, students, parents? The change is huge, as for years we were trained to believe in one language, classes organized in terms of a language. They teach French, they teach Spanish, they teach Hebrew, or whatever. What is multilingual competence? Is competence the right word even? Somebody said maybe we should talk about other terms like accomplishments, negotiations, or something else. How do immigrants and other foreign language learners utilize L1 in production? We don't know much about it. Is it even fair to compare L2 learners to L1? Because Ellen Bialystok, whom I'm sure you heard about, I think she's giving a talk here in a few weeks' time. Yeah. I don't know in which program, in your program?
No, I don't remember.
But you should go and hear her. She's really, really wonderful. She's talking, I think, on the 23rd of April or something like that. So she shows that L1 and L2 learners have different brains. And she shows that people who are L2 learners, who are bilinguals forever, their brain is different. Now, what do we do with different brains? Can we even give them the same tests? Okay? She too doesn't know how to develop tests that will be appropriate for bilingual tests, although she's working on that. What are differences between the trans-languaging? We have all those bunch of words. What's it? Trans-languaging, bi-multilingual, multimodality, new expanded view of language, which is more contextual. I mean, we have all those terms, and I think we know very little about them. How are these manifested with regard to different competences and different phases? Different phases. Is it 2 years after you arrive to a country the same as 15 years? How do different L2 users utilize L1, L2? One of my PhD students, she finished her PhD, and she has an article coming now in the Modern Language Journal. She says that the effect of third language is even stronger than the second language. So most people are more than bilingual today. Maybe not in the US, but in other countries. Because in Europe they study learning language 1, and then language 2, and language 3, and you learn 4 or 5 languages until you reach 12th grade. Not everywhere, but in many countries. How is ELF manifested when students are encouraged? Now we know that we use something from our L1, we get penalized. What happens if we do it, use it, like chocolate, do whatever, pictures, whatever. What will happen then? We are always told that it's not a good thing for years. What happens when we're encouraged? Use whatever source you know. I wonder what will happen. All right, I showed you this. Okay, legitimizing these kind of languages. Okay, what else important I want to say before I'm done? Okay, basically the political thing, I just want to say the current tests serve the system, the US government or whatever. They are not based on how language are processed by people, but what some people say they should be used. You see the difference? Like accent. You should have a native accent, but I can't. What do you do? You better accept what I can do and don't force me into something I cannot do. Okay? And I think that's the main question. How can we convince the stakeholders, the language testing institutions, teachers, parents, principals to adapt tests with these new constructs when the monolingual native variety is still so dominant and so powerful? So I want to leave you with this question, really. But I think more than anything else, what I want to say that it's important and it's powerful theoretically, but we are now, I would say, in the process of trying to figure out ways to deal with this challenge. So thank you very much, and we'll be happy to answer questions. Okay. Where people are allowed to encourage even to use a number of languages. What I just showed now, number 7, cognitive work, mediation, talking about the test in L1, and using multiple qualitative assessment approaches to see how people can resolve problems, because oftentimes they will follow the right way, but they will get the wrong answer. Okay, so that happens too, this I showed you already, okay. So, trans-languages, challenges now. I'm not saying it's challenges. What do you mean by trans-languaging? I said it from the beginning. We have to be, it's only a new idea, a new concept, multilingual, but we know it exists, we know it's right. We still don't know what to do with that. So maybe next time I get here, we'll solve it. Okay, so here, trans-language is still a vague concept. Can testers respond to this new reality, as well as teachers, students, parents? The change is huge, as for years we were trained to believe in one language, classes organized in terms of a language. They teach French, they teach Spanish, they teach Hebrew, or whatever. What is multilingual competence? Is competence the right word even? Somebody said maybe we should talk about other terms like accomplishments, negotiations, or something else. How do immigrants and other foreign language learners utilize L1 in production? We don't know much about it. Is it even fair to compare L2 learners to L1? Because Ellen Bialystok, whom I'm sure you heard about, I think she's giving a talk here in a few weeks' time. Yeah? I don't know in which program, in your program?
No, I don't remember.
But you should go and hear her. She's really, really wonderful. She's talking, I think, on the 23rd of April or something like that. So she shows that L1 and L2 learners have different brains. And she shows that people who are L2 learners, who are bilinguals forever, their brain is different. Now, what do we do with different brains? Can we even give them the same tests? Okay? She too doesn't know how to develop tests that will be appropriate for bilingual tests, although she's working on that. What are differences between the trans-languaging? We have all those bunch of words. What's it? Trans-languaging, bi-multilingual, multimodality, new expanded view of language, which is more contextual. I mean, we have all those terms, and I think we know very little about them. How are these manifested with regard to different competences and different phases? Different phases. Is it 2 years after you arrive to a country the same as 15 years? How do different L2 users utilize L1, L2? One of my PhD students, she finished her PhD, and she has an article coming now in the Modern Language Journal. She says that the effect of third language is even stronger than the second language. So most people are more than bilingual today. Maybe not in the US, but in other countries. Because in Europe they study learning language 1, and then language 2, and language 3, and you learn 4 or 5 languages until you reach 12th grade. Not everywhere, but in many countries. How is ELF manifested when students are encouraged? Now we know that we use something from our L1, we get penalized. What happens if we do it, use it, like chocolate, do whatever, pictures, whatever. What will happen then? We are always told that it's not a good thing for years. What happens when we're encouraged? Use whatever source you know. I wonder what will happen. All right, I showed you this. Okay, then legitimizing these kind of languages. Okay, what else important I want to say before I'm done? Okay, basically the political thing, I just want to say the current tests serve the system, the US government or whatever. They are not based on how language are processed by people, but what some people say they should be used. You see the difference? Like accent. You should have a native accent, but I can't. What do you do? You better accept what I can do and don't force me into something I cannot do. Okay? And I think that's the main question. How can we convince the stakeholders, the language testing institutions, teachers, parents, principals to adapt tests with these new constructs when the monolingual native variety is still so dominant and so powerful? So I want to leave you with this question, really. But I think more than anything else, what I want to say that it's important and it's powerful theoretically, but we are now, I would say, in the process of trying to figure out ways to deal with this challenge. So thank you very much, and we'll be happy to answer questions.